most powerful way to manifest is just rest as oneness and just to have intention. So by far that's the most powerful, but it's also the most challenging. If I become nothing, if I become just this transparency, then the arrow just basically passes right through. So there's no reaction, there's no new karma that's set off, there's just freedom.
I want to welcome on this podcast Joey Lott on this very brand new episode of the Rich Inside podcast, where every week we welcome spiritual teachers, high performers that help us, me and you, to become happier high performers. So, Joey, it's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for making the time.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
So, you have a quote that says, "Ignorance creates fear." My question for you is, what is the understanding people need to become fearless?
So I think of it kind of like as a child being afraid of the dark. And so when there's darkness, then it's possible to project into that darkness all kinds of things. And imagine, there's Dracula, or there's Frankenstein's monster, or there's the boogeyman, or somebody's coming to get me in the dark. And because of that darkness, it's possible to keep imagining those things. But then actually that's just something that the child is doing to themselves. There's not actually a monster out there in the dark. It's just in the imagination of the child. And so then turning on the light allows the child to see that there's nothing out there, which then immediately makes one realize that I was just doing it and I can let go. And so for me, that's the key insight, is that whatever the thing is, I know different people have different ways that these things manifest for them. For some people, they're, it's like social anxiety. And for some people, they have particular phobias. And for some people, it's anger issues. Whatever it might be, though, it really comes down to this discovery that I'm doing that to myself within myself. And I can learn how to stop doing that. And when I learn to stop doing that, then all of that power that I have always had that I was using against myself, now I can use for myself.
That reminds me right away of the story of Ram Dass, where he talks about the snake and the rope, which I think is really interesting because a lot of the fear is self-inflicted, as you said. Point number 2. Which I find really interesting because I went through this literally today. You said, don't go to war with yourself believing that the snake is real. And so a lot of the times you have these negative thoughts, these negative ruminations, and you believe the real and you start just falling into that vicious cycle. So how do you actually not go to war with yourself and find peace?
Well, let me say this first. So I think that a person has to first realize that they're really tired of suffering. Because until a person is really willing to recognize that, then they're usually going to continue to do the same things that they've been doing. But once a person realizes they're really tired of the suffering, they're really tired of the pain, and that they want a change, that they're really serious about a change and they're willing to do whatever is required for the change, then what's possible is to take a look and see what is the actual nature of the problem that I'm experiencing. So so that your audience can know about this story of the snake and the rope, just briefly, it's a classic story about a man who is traveling and he comes to a little inn or whatever, and he's ready to go to sleep, and the sun is setting, and then in that dusk he sees what he's convinced is a snake that's coiled ready to strike in the corner. And so he's terrified because he's thinking this poisonous snake is going to strike and kill me. And so all night long he's unable to sleep. And then in the morning, as the sun is beginning to rise, the light starts to dawn, and he looks over there and he sees it's not a snake at all, it's a coiled rope. And so this is as I say, a classic teaching tale, because this is exactly what we're doing, is that we're imagining that there's something there and we react to it as though that's true. But it's never actually been there. It was always a rope. It was never a snake. But in our imagination, we were convinced that it was a snake. And so we were reacting just as this man was doing, with that fear, that tension, which is self-harm, out of a misunderstanding. And so for me, that basic misunderstanding is thinking that there's something outside of me that's doing this to me. So whether that's fear or anger or whatever it might be, that basic misunderstanding is that there's something outside of me that's the cause of it. There's something outside that's doing it to me. And so we can tell ourselves all kinds of stories. I had lots of stories in my life. I thought it was sugar, for example. I thought it was lots of other things. And so people have, in their own lives, they have lots of stories about it. They think that it's the environment, they think it's the government, they think it's the economy, they think it's their spouse, they think it's their in-laws, they think it's their neighbor, etc. It's always something, or it's some particular condition that has a name. And so long as we believe that it's something outside of us, then we don't have power, because that thing is doing it to us. If my mother-in-law is doing it to me, then it's all her fault and I don't have any power. But when I finally realize that I'm done hurting, I don't want to hurt anymore, I'm so tired of this pain, and I'm willing to do whatever is required in order to finally be okay, then I can look and see what is actually the real nature of this experience. Is what's actually going on my mother-in-law? Is that the truth? Or is what's actually going on something inside of me? And it turns out that it's inside of me, because my mother-in-law is out there. So what I'm experiencing is in here. So it can't be her. So then when I look and see, well, what is it that's inside of me that I'm experiencing? It always, for me, it comes down to, as I've described, tension. There's a physical tension, or an energetic tension that's going on, that I'm doing in order to try and protect myself against something. And that just signals this loop within myself that says I'm not safe, and therefore I need to tense up more. And then that signals that I'm even more not safe, which means I have to tense up even more. So it's a vicious cycle. But when I see that that's what's really going on, that's, to tie it back to that story, that it's a snake, it's a rope, not a snake. So the rope meaning that it's just this thing that I'm doing within myself that I actually have power over. Then I can start to practice releasing that. And then, as I said earlier, all of that energy that I've been using to do all this tension within myself becomes liberated, which means I can start to use that power for all of the positive creative purposes that I want in my life, to be successful, to be giving, to be loving, to be a generous, good person in my life and in the lives of my loved ones. So that's what's possible.
That's beautiful. I directly thought of, when you said that, of Teach Han Nhat, and he has a quote that says, "The lotus flower blooms in the mud." When I read that, it touched my heart, because it's kind of necessary to have that suffering to awaken sometimes, right?
I think not for everybody, but I guess for those who do suffer, then the suffering is necessary.
I like how you put that. That's very true. Okay, so to move to the next point, you talk about divine realization, right? And that a lot of people ask, so how do you achieve divine perfection, right? To feel pure joy, pure love, pure peace. You said it's simple. You don't. You can't achieve what you already are. So that point is extremely powerful. And you only realize how powerful it is when you experience it. You experience that you're already whole, already love, already everything you want. You are already that. My
Yeah.
question for you is, what should people stop or start doing? What should people start doing to experience more of that truth?
Well, in a sense, it has a lot to do with the stories that we tell ourselves. Because the truth is that all of this is energy. Everything is energy. And it doesn't really have an intrinsic form. The form that we perceive is based on on what we think about it, basically. So if I think that something is good, then I perceive that it is good, and if I think that something is bad, I perceive that it is bad. And so, I mean, this kind of ties back with the snake and the rope. So if I keep telling myself it's a snake, it's a snake, it's a snake, it's a snake, then I start to see that it's a snake, and I react to it in that way. And then I can get other people who will join my club, and we'll all point and say, it's a snake, it's so scary. What are we going to do? We should petition the government to get rid of the snake, and we can do all kinds of things like that. And so it becomes very real for us because we build our whole lives and identities around it. But it never is that. It's just what we're projecting onto it. And so this is what's going on all the time with everything. And so if I'm telling myself over and over and over, I'm miserable, and life's not fair, and life is hard, and life is all suffering, and all these things, then I perceive that and I believe that that's true. And I can get lots of other people who will agree with me. And so we can all confirm for one another that that's true. It's definitely true. We're all seeing the same thing, so it must be true. But it's just the story that we're telling. And that story we become so attached to it. And I see this both in myself and also in working with other people so often. I see the attachment that we can have to certain stories. And even upon having a glimpse that it's just a story, oftentimes people still are reluctant to let go of it because they're so identified with it, even though letting go of it means that there's freedom. But that's really it, is just to be willing to let go of those painful stories and then start to open to that this is already peace, this is already wholeness, this is already love, this is already okayness. And it's just the mind will continue to attach to the old way for some time because it's just in that habit. And it will say, what are you talking about? This can't be peace. This is suffering. This is awful. This can't be okayness. This can't be love. This is misery. But just by persistently letting go of that, and then again, for me, it's so important to also relax the physicality. Then it starts to become clearer that actually this is okay. It's always been okay. There's no problem, actually. And so that's my suggestion.
And what are some kind of daily habits or practical tools you use to be able to maybe remind yourself of that truth or to relax into that truth?
Being aware of the breath, I think, is one of the most powerful because the breath is a really good indication of state. And so it's impossible to be stressed out and to be breathing in a very calm and relaxed way. And so being aware of the breath is just like it's a monitor of the state. And so being aware of the breath, I find, is just it's a very simple but very powerful practice that can improve everything. That's the number one thing that I can suggest.
Any form of specific breath that you use? Because I experimented with breath work, I experimented with TM, transcendental meditation, and I found that my favorite one was just sitting still and just focusing on the breath with kind of no attachment to a name, to a certain kind of philosophy. Is there something that you that you've seen work for you best?
Yeah, I like I said, I find that just being aware of the breath is the most effective because the thing about the breath is that it's one of those processes that is given to us by nature. So I don't have to try to breathe. Breathing is gifted to me by nature. It just happens automatically. But I do have I can very easily take control of the breathing. And that's what's very special about the breath is that it's automatically given, but I can very easily take conscious control over it. And because of that, that tendency to grab control of the breath is very common. And so that's because, as I said, that's how we can regulate our state. So if I want to become anxious, all I have to do is start breathing rapidly. And so a lot of the time when people are talking about breath, they're talking about a particular kind of breathing, a particular style of breathing. So, box breathing or, longer exhalation than inhalation, or breathing through the nose and out, in through the nose, out through the mouth, all these different ways of breathing. But what I'm talking about is just being aware of the actual natural breath that's given by nature, because nature knows how to regulate everything optimally, much better than I can. If I'm trying to control everything, then I'm not going to do a very good job of it, but nature is managing everything all the time perfectly. So I find that it's much better for me just to allow nature to do the breath, and I just watch it. So I'm just there watching the breath, allowing nature to do it and regulate it for the perfect optimal experience.
Okay, I get it. So it's not an attachment to one specific form of breathing, but it's more being the observer of the natural breath throughout the day.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I think that's something people could take away from this, is that you don't have to stick to just one practice. What I really loved about your conversation, what you said in the conversation on the Holocene podcast, you said the secret is the arrow hitting nothing. You were talking about karma and karmic liberation, and you said the secret is the arrow hitting nothing. You were giving a reference that there's 3 forms of karmas. If you could go briefly through them and then explain kind of the meaning of the secret is the arrow hitting nothing.
Sure. Okay. So very briefly, karma just means action, and all action is both a cause and an effect. So all of life is governed by karma, in that all of life is governed by action. And so if you think about most of the time, we're just reacting, right? So something happens and then we react. Somebody, if a mosquito bites you, you do that. It's just a reaction. Or if somebody insults you, you flip them the bird or whatever. It's just a reaction. But every reaction is another action that sets into motion another reaction. So most of life is just this chain reactions. And so that's the normal course of things, is that's what's going on in life. It's mostly unconscious reaction. So classically, karma is then described as there are several different varieties of karma, and it's likened to a bow and arrow. So if you could, the main point here though is to understand that there's a particular kind of karma that is the one to be concerned about, because there are some kinds of karmas that are like you're starting to string the bow, or rather you're starting to put the arrow onto the bow, but you haven't even drawn it. So that doesn't really matter. It's not going to set into motion anything. Another kind is that you've actually drawn the arrow back, but you haven't released it. So also not problematic. But the one that is potentially problematic, or it could be for good or for bad, but the one that actually sets into motion something is when you've actually released the arrow. Now, once the arrow is released, it's going to hit something, and ultimately it's going to hit you. That's the thing about karma is that if you release the arrow, ultimately it comes back to you. And so then we've got all of these karmas. They're called prarabdha karma, the ones where the arrow has been released. So we've got all of this prarabdha karma from all of these things that we've done. So if I have a habit of thinking in very negative ways, I just think, oh, the world sucks, the world sucks, the world sucks, then I've set into motion this karma that's going to come back and hit me. So then the real question, or the challenge is, so I'm feeling the effects of all of this karma that's coming back to me all the time. So whatever happens in my life is like that. I'm constantly coming into contact with my own karma. And then I have a choice, and this is really the important point here, is that either I'm going to react to that karma, which means that I'm just setting into motion more karma, which is then going to come back to me. So it becomes this cycle, this endless cycle of I'm doing something, and then it comes back to me, and then I do something in reaction, and it comes back to me. Or I have the option of letting it hit nothing, meaning that if I become nothing, if I become just this transparency, then the arrow just basically passes right through. So there's no reaction, there's no new karma that's set off, there's just freedom. And so that's what's possible. And that's really the basis of everything that I've been proposing, is that if I learn that I'm ultimately responsible for my experience, and I take a look and I see what it is that I'm doing, and I realize that what I'm doing is I'm tensing up inside of myself, and that tension makes me like a spring-loaded thing, so that anything that strikes me, I'm gonna freak out. Well, that's no good for me, actually. But then if I realize, okay, I can relax, so then stuff's still going to come at me. People are still going to come to me and say, hey, I don't like you. And if that doesn't hit anything, if I'm just free within and open within myself, then there's no further karma that's produced as a result of that.
I love the example of the arrow because it makes it really obvious how your actions have certain consequences, and that you have the control to decide if you shoot the right arrows or the wrong ones. And so
Yeah.
I love that. And I think being aware of that makes it really important, makes it really powerful to change the way you think, you act, the way you behave with others, and it creates a powerful transformation, whether that's small or big. Let's jump to the point of kind of manifestation and success and abundance and all of that. So the second part of the podcast. And what I found really interesting is that you said heal first, then manifest. That was kind of your main idea. So not being driven by the I am not good enough. And so people chase goals to try to fill that void, but ultimately it results to dissatisfaction and to more void. And so tell me more about how to address the trap of manifesting from that place of I am not good enough, and kind of the right way to approach it to manifest faster.
Well, I mean, you already basically addressed it, which is that. So I look at it this way. I often suggest just be clear on what you actually want. And a lot of the desires, we have lots of desires, but most of those desires are not actually ours. They were borrowed. And so if a person is chasing after trying to fulfill borrowed desires, then there's no possibility of it being satisfying. So the best approach there is just to practice letting go. And if you can let go of a desire, then it's not yours. So that will save people a tremendous amount of time and wasted energy and suffering, is just to let go of all the desires that are not theirs. But then we're still left with some desires that are actually ours, that they've given rise to this lifetime. We came into this lifetime with certain desires. Like I want to know true abundance. I want to know true love. I want to know what it truly is to be healthy. These kinds of desires that we might have. So then we want to manifest those. But then your question is, how can we manifest those most efficiently with the least amount of unnecessary suffering? And so I suggest getting really clear on what you actually want. Because if I just say, "Well, I want $1 million," then I could manifest $1 million, but I'm pretty sure that I don't actually want $1 million. So I need to get clear on what it is that I actually want. What I actually want, we could say, is to know my own inner abundance, and so that's something that I want to get clear on, because when I'm clear on that, then I can. That puts me in the right direction right away. It puts my attention on within rather than on the external effect. So I want to keep my attention on the inner cause. The inner cause is always going to be that I want to know inner abundance. I want to know inner peace. I want to know inner wholeness. I want to know inner unconditional love. So if I'm focused on those things, then that's going to put me in the right direction. It's going to spare me from seeking external stuff that's not going to be ultimately fulfilling. Now, with that said, if there's an external expression of that that's necessary for my own process, then that will happen.
Okay, that does make sense, because we sometimes get brainwashed by society and by parents and by culture to have certain goals that don't really mean much to us, and I believe it's a
Right.
powerful practice. So how do you, for example, for you, what helped you to realize what you really wanted, not what society perhaps was expecting? Specifically, so what are the kind of tools you use, the practical tools?
It's a good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that, so I have to really consider this. Well, so for me, I actually really had to be willing to stop a lot. I had, because I was engaged in so many things, trying to achieve things in my life, and like I was, trying to provide for my family and all of these things that I thought I had to do, and that was creating suffering for me. And so I had to be willing to stop, and that was I think that was the biggest challenge, was to just be willing to stop. And what I mean by that is I had to just notice if what my motivation was for everything that I was doing in the moment. I had to start to actually look and see, why am I doing this thing? Why am I going to send this email? Why am I going to make this phone call? Why am I going to drive to this place? Why am I going to get out of bed? Why am I doing any of these things? And I had to be willing to stop doing things unless I was clear about it. And so that's very practical, but also very challenging, I think. So I don't know if that's for most people to do, because I think that's going to be very difficult for most people. But that's been my own process, is just to stop doing anything unless I have inner clarity about it.
Okay, so kind of that, mm, kind of pausing and taking time to reflect on why it is that you're doing what you're doing. Is it true to you? That's kind of what the audience can take away from this. That it's kind of like a why.
Yes.
Why am I supposed to post that photo on Instagram showing off? Why am I supposed to show off my new T-shirt or money or watch to friends? You know, it's kind of the starting point is why.
I guess you could say that, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it, because what I found is that most of the motivation for habitual things is fear. fear that I
Mm.
don't have enough, I won't have enough, I'm not enough, uh, I'm lacking somehow, that I'm going to be found out, I'll be exposed, I'll fail, I'll suffer more. All these kinds of fears are the real motivation that just prompt a lot of activity.
Yep.
And that activity is usually just sort of frantic, stressed activity that's ultimately not satisfying and that doesn't actually produce real value or good in the world. And so, yeah, I think that's great how you took what I said and put it into something very useful and actionable. Yes, to understand. Um, am, I'll simplify it even more. Am I motivated by fear? And if so, I shouldn't do it.
Wow, that's powerful. That's really powerful. Am I motivated by fear? Mm. I think that would kind of make clear what are the actions that you're doing for the ego and what are the actions you're doing more for yourself and for the being. Do you agree?
Yes, I would even take it further, which is to say that when I know that I'm okay, when I know that I am enough, then I'm not actually concerned about myself. I'm not concerned about looking good or getting something for myself. What happens is I start to be only interested in being of service.
Mm. You said the word service and it directly popped to mind. I was reading The Miracle of Love by Ram Dass, and it's a story about his guru, Baba Neem Karoli. He's a beautiful teacher and a beautiful saint. And so a lot of people came to him and asked him, a lot of devotees, how do I get enlightened? And I was reading it yesterday, and he said, serve people. And others asked him, how do I raise Kundalini? And he said, serve people and feed people. And so, how much has service been important to you in your life to awaken and to touch more and more the being inside?
I think it's very important. Like I said, if I'm focused on what what I need and what's in it for me, then I'm coming from a place within myself of a sense of lack. And
Mm.
so that's just feeding into a very vicious cycle. But when uh, I will say though that for me, it hasn't been so much a matter of trying to be of service as a means of uh, growth, as it is that just by discovering that okayness and completeness within myself, naturally what arises is a focus on service. So I can't really vouch so much for how much it works to put service to use service as a technique, but I think it works because people use it.
Mm. That directly brings to mind your point in your series where you did the blogs about the laws of the universe. You talked about the law of oneness and how realizing that how much does that realization of oneness make service natural because it's just pure love for the other being?
Well, in a way, it makes it's not about the other being at all. It's really about the self. I mean, that's the paradox, I guess, is that when I'm focused on myself as a separate individual, perceiving that I'm lacking something, then I'm I'm stuck in that vicious cycle. But when I realize that there's only one truth, there's only one being, one consciousness, one reality, then that realization is that that's everything is that. So it's actually ultimately selfish. All service is actually ultimately self-service.
Mm-mm.
If I'm taking from others, then I'm just taking from myself.
Mm. If I'm taking for, oh, yeah, I agree. I agree. I think if we delve deeper into the law of attraction, and we see kind of how powerful is it to have we talked about clarity before, right? We talked about how important it is to heal first, right? To act from that place of true abundance, like you say. How important is, what are kind of the next steps or principles or strategies that you found most effective to bring something from the unmanifest to the manifest, from the potential world to reality?
Well, the most powerful for sure is to rest as oneness and just to have intention, because that's how everything is created. And so it's the point of greatest power and leverage. So by far that's the most powerful, but it's also the most challenging, because most of the time people tend to want to put their attention on the outside. They want to put their attention on the results and monitor that. So what I'm saying is that the most powerful way to manifest is just to know that I am already complete. I'm already the source of all of creation. And if I have an intention, it is already manifest. So then I don't have any attachment to it. I know that it's already done. So if there's an intention for $1 million, it's already done. I don't need to care. I don't need to put my attention on the results and find out if the $1 million is in the bank or not, because I know for sure that it's already done, because I'm resting as the source and I have the intention. It's done. But like I say, for most of us, most of the time, we find that challenging, because we're wanting to check. We're like, I want to see what's in the bank account. Is there $1 million in the bank account? Yeah.
Resonates. And I feel like being too attached to an outcome repulses it away. And resting in consciousness, like you said, in the truth, just relaxing into your oneness, I can resonate with that. I feel the intuitive truth of what you're saying. It is tough though. Let's be real, to have a desire, but to kind of surrender it. It's kind of a dilemma in some sort, a paradox. So what are do you have mantras that you use to bring yourself back to when you feel that you're getting attached? Is there some certain things that you do to rest in that oneness?
Yeah, I just notice the tension and notice that feels bad and let go.
When you say let go, it's easy to say, but it's hard to do. So what's kind of the process of letting go? Because when I feel, for example, today, I woke up and I just was feeling off. Like I wasn't connected to being, I wasn't mentally, I was just all over the place. And there's that problem when you try to let go, is that there's that resistance where you're like, no, I don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel the anxiety. I don't want to feel, I don't want. So how do you actually let go?
So, first of all, if I'm feeling bad, then I know that I'm feeling, right? I'm only feeling bad because I'm feeling. And so then I focus
Mm-hmm.
on the feeling, because the feeling is really the heart of it. And then I bring it back to remembering that all feeling is a doing. So feeling is not a noun, it's not something that is happening to me, it's something that I'm doing. I might not have conscious awareness of how I'm doing it, but I am doing it, and so I can let that go. So the letting go is letting go of what I'm doing. So in that kind of situation, if I'm feeling bad, then my mind wants to be outwardly directed. It wants to say, what's happening out there? But I just bring it to noticing what I'm doing. So I can become aware of something that I'm doing. There's some tension that I'm holding somewhere, and I can let that go. So it might be that I'm clenching my jaw. It might be that I'm furrowing my brow. It might be that I'm squeezing my throat, or I might be tensing up my chest, or I might be squeezing my
Mm.
belly, or I might be making fists. I can just notice that, and then I can release that. I can soften that. I can let that go. And I might not be able to let it go completely, but I can let it go somewhat. And if I keep practicing that, I get better at it. And what I've noticed is for sure that the more that I let go, the better I feel.
Wow, that's powerful. Now I get what you mean by let go. It's kind of you can kind of sense on your in your body the tensions, and from these tensions then you can realize, okay, I'm not feeling well, right? It's not a beautiful feeling that I'm feeling, and then you can relax the body first, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of the way you go about it. Okay. And then once the body's relaxed, then it makes it easier to also relax the mind. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay. I love this. I love this. Um, so now another thing that's also very interesting is once you rest into oneness and you're connected with the source, doesn't all desires go away from that place? Kind of then the only desire
Most.
becomes to become more and more connected to the source. Rumi had a quote about this, that once you touch God, or you feel the oneness, then all the other desires become irrelevant.
Yes.
And so what would be kind of, so then maybe intuition plays a role where you have to do a certain thing to acquire something that will lead to service in of itself. So do you use intuition of any sort to decide certain things, or
Yes.
to,
Yes. I
and
mean,
how do you go about that?
to me, well, intuition is about listening. That's the key. Is
Listening
it's
to
just
who?
about listening to the to the truth within. I mean that it's there
Okay.
singing within us all the time.
Okay. And so kind of what's a lot of people find it tough to connect into intuition because it's different for every single person. How do you know when it's intuition? So head versus heart. How do you know that it's one or the other?
Like I say, intuition is about listening, and so it's very helpful to
Mm-hmm.
to practice listening, and that practice of breath awareness is very powerful for
Mm-hmm.
that. So the more that a person practices, the more regularly a person practices breath awareness, the more that they're training themselves to be aware of that intuitive guidance, because the intuition is guiding us to our greatest good. It's guiding us to our most to our greatest expression of our authentic selves. And so that process is one that feels actually very wonderful, but we have to be willing to listen and receive in order to be guided in that way. And so it's really just a process of listening regularly, and then it happens as a result of that. It's not really, I don't believe that it's possible to explain that in advance, because it can only be understood by having the experience, and the experience can be had quite naturally by practicing listening. So that's really the key to it. And Fuad, I've very much enjoyed this, and I have another meeting now, so I need to wrap it up.
Yes, of course, of course, of course. Just for everyone listening, if you wanna, I'm gonna put all the links below. So if you wanna book a session with Joey, or you wanna access his Zoom calls through the newsletter, or subscribe to his YouTube channel, I will put everything in the description. And yeah, thank you so much for your time, Joey, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Blessings to you.
And so this is the end of this week's episode. I have a special gift just for you. Because you've made it this far, you deserve to know some exclusive news. So the upcoming guests are crazy, and I haven't revealed this to many people. There's David Icke, who's a world-renowned conspiracy theorist. There's Donald Hoffman, who's featured on the show of Tim Ferriss, of Tom Bilyeu, of like huge shows. And there's also one of my favorites, which is Yongey Rinpoche, Mingyur Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan Buddhist monk. Check all those guys out on YouTube, and you'll be like literally stunned at how crazy it is. These are huge guest revelations. I haven't told this to many people, so this is something you deserve to know. Second thing, there's new shows every Sunday on the Rich Inside podcast that are aimed to make you a happier high performer. And last and final thing, thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for taking time out of your day to invest in yourself, right? To invest in your wisdom, to invest in your spirituality, and to invest into your success. And so I hope to see you on the next episode. If you enjoyed this one, let me know in the comments. Comment yes, comment something that you enjoyed in the episode. And yeah, this has been your boy, Aji, and thank you so much for tuning in. Ciao.